We'll go ahead and get rolling now for the afternoon. Hello to all of you. I know a few of you in the agricultural education and communications at Texas Tech, and I'll be serving as your moderator/timer. If it seems like I'm trying to cut someone off or move quickly, I apologize in advance because we are going to try to get through two sets of questions. Those sets consist of 3 questions each, first for the consultants and then the second set for our growers. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over the microphone and allow our panel to introduce themselves.
I'm Jim Elsner from Dumas, Texas. Been consulting about 25 years.
I'm Glenn Schur. I'm a farmer producer in Hale County.
Daryl Kitten. I live in Lubbock and consult in Lynn, Lubbock, Hale, and Parmer and Hockley counties about 25 years.
James Todd. I'm a consultant in Hale County, work in Lamb, Swisher, Castro, and Floyd County as well.
Rocky Buckner. I'm a producer. I farm in Hale, Floyd, and Castro County.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Like I said, we have 2 sets of 3 in terms of questions for our panel, and we'll begin with the consultant panel. And gentlemen, those of you that are on the opposite side of the grower panel or consultant panel, vice versa, depending on which set of questions that we are on, feel free to chime in if you feel that there's something that needs to be commented upon during the discussion. I also encourage questions from the group, and we have 1 hour, so we'll try to work efficiently, as I said. The first question for our consultants will be, what criteria do you use when making water management decisions?
One thing that we always try and do is try and start with at least 3 feet of stored moisture. I know there's a lot of debate on the effectiveness of pre-water, but 3 feet is kind of what we try and start with. A lot of years it may just be 2 feet, some years it might be 4 or more, just kind of depending on the rain and what our situation and outlook is. The second thing that we always try and do as we monitor moisture throughout the growing season is we try to keep from depleting that 3rd foot of soil moisture before we get to peak water use for that crop. So we try not to deplete that 3rd foot going into tassel for corn or bloom for cotton. We monitor moisture using gypsum blocks. That's probably the cheapest and most effective way to monitor moisture, in my opinion. We take that information, read moisture blocks twice a week and email them to our growers, and it works really well, I think. Avoids an information overload. We have had some experience with capacitive probes and those sorts of things, and no doubt they're highly accurate and effective, but they are costly and they can create a bit of an overload to the grower with information. Through our scouting services, we probe on a weekly basis and use the moisture by feel method, and it's a quick way to give an estimate of soil moisture to our growers. So those are the main ways that we monitor moisture and help us make our decisions.
I have to preface my comments with the area that I work in is mostly real limited water, 2 to 3 gallons a minute. Most of my acreage is drip with the remaining in pivot. The first consideration that I use is usually plant population on these real limited water supplies. In cotton, for instance, we're planting usually 35 to 45,000 plants per acre, which I know is pretty low, but our yield goals are not that 4 and 5 bale an acre with this kind of water. It's 3 bales in general. The second criteria I use, of course, is the crop growth stage. That coupled with the ET that crop is using on a daily basis. As far as the ET, there's 2 or 3 different websites that I use. There's one called Aqua Planner by Pat Scarth in Amarillo that gives a daily ET. The Extension Service has one, and then Texas Alliance of Water Conservation has come up with some good graphs over a 10 or 15-year period, which is real accurate. I likewise also use stored moisture. We like to have, again, at least 2 feet of stored moisture, preferably 3 in these limited water situations. The next thing I use, of course, is the 5-day weather forecast. I have to keep in mind the amount of water supply that I have since it's very limited. I also use the hand probes with the feel method and the penetrometers to check for deep moisture. I found over the years that although this doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles and flattering, it transports pretty well. It's reasonably accurate, it's quick, and it's cheap. And we are tinkering with some of the newer technologies, the probes. Started about 3 years with this and really haven't had a good year to get the full effect of this new technology because With these low water supplies, a lot of it has been turn on the water and don't turn it off until the last minute. So we're still experimenting with the newer technologies and the probes.
I would have to echo exactly what these other consultants have said. I just use soil probes for monitoring moisture. The grower is the biggest criteria setter for me. If he have one that owns a grain elevator, so cotton for him is not much of an option. So we have to just try to maximize the grain crops that we can, because he's not going to run cotton through that elevator. Have some that do cattle, and they want to manage, winter cereal grains for grazing. And I have other ones that have no interest whatsoever in cattle. So you start with those criteria, and then take their available water, divide that available water among the crops that they need for those end uses.
Thank you, gentlemen. The second question that we have listed for the consultant panel will be, what is your perspective on the best approach for water management?
Topics we discussed this morning, water use efficiency, I guess, has got to be it. It's what are you getting out of each one of those inches of water that you pump on a field. My two biggest clients that I work for there at Dumas have totally eliminated irrigated wheat from the rotation. It offers the least amount of return for the inch of water that we put on, and they just will not spend money on irrigated wheat anymore. So it's all grain crops or cotton.
Well, I'll have to say the same thing. It's all about getting the most product for the inch of water that you put on. The question is, how do you do that? And I don't think there's any silver bullet to doing that. But one thing that we've started tinkering with quite a bit here in the last 3 or 4 years is no-till. On these limited water supplies, where you've got 2 or 3 gallons a minute, you can only put on so much water, and you're almost always below the daily demand. So you have to look at capturing all the rainfall and keeping it that you could possibly get. And I think no-till is one of the best ways to do that. It offers a bunch of other advantages in terms of soil health and soil fertility, in terms of wind protection. So that's one of the main things I'm trying to do. On drip, we're trying to plant flat instead of bedding up. That was unheard of on a sandy loam soil years ago, but we think we've got that to where it can work. And I'm a big proponent of using plant regulators as a water management tool to keep a plant short and stocky and square. Again, I'm not trying to grow 4 or 5 bales an acre in most cases. We're trying to hit 3 bales, and we think we can do that with a short, stocky plant where our water is not being wasted and growing a lot of growth and stalk that we really don't need. The current varieties that we have a great capacity to grow a lot of bowls on a short plant, and that's the way I approach my plant regulator management.
Echo a lot of what these guys have said. One thing I always tell my customers is, just because I'm doing something on one guy's farm, don't think we need to be doing that on yours. I work in an area where we have anywhere from 200 gallons a minute in some pivots all the way up to 1,000 gallons. So there's a wide range of water in the way that we manage things. And then too, you have to look at what the grower's goals are and what equipment he has and what he's geared up to do, much like Jim said, if a guy owns an elevator, what best fits for him. In saying that, one of the things that's really helped us in the past few years is using the gypsum blocks, monitoring that moisture where we can track those changes from a couple times a week. I feel like it's giving us a 7 to 10 day advance notice of what's fixing to happen on these years where we're extremely dry. The probes are a great tool, the hand probes, but sometimes they give you a false sense of security, and you'll look at those moisture blocks and you'll see the trouble that's about to come. So that can be a little bit stressful at times too. One thing that we do, of course, is we track PETs like Darrell was saying. I think that monitoring your moisture in your soil and knowing where you're at with PETs is essential to knowing how to manage your water and how much water you need and where you need your water. A lot of my stuff is half circles of corn and half circles of cotton, so we're trying to put that water where we need it the most. We're trying to reduce our cultivation practices and reduce moisture loss that way.
You kind of mentioned the alternative crops and other things that can provide some cover, so that kind of led us into question 3 for our consultants, and that is, do you employ any water management planning early in the season? For example, pre-watering guidelines or crop apportionments, etc.
Most of the time, this time of year, here in the next couple of weeks, I'll start going out and we'll start probing fields, especially where we know we're going to plant corn, and make determinations for how much water it's going to take to get us at least to 3 feet wet. A lot of times we can't put enough moisture on in the next month to get us wet to 3 feet. And so that's kind of a bit of a challenge, but we do go around and we determine how much pre-water and kind of see where we're at with our pivots when we turn them on, and some plans may change once we find out how much water we're starting with this year. We follow up prior to planting and determine any additional irrigation that might be needed, or just right after planting we may be probing fields to see if we need to put some more water on to get that profile full. We try to match our yield goals with irrigation capacity and vice versa. Since 2011, I think we've realized that without rainfall, we must provide 100% of the crop water needs through irrigation, and that can get pretty tough. I kind of came up with these numbers on my own, and then talked to Dan Krieg, and I think he said I was pretty well right on. You know, we're thinking about 4 gallons per minute per acre to meet the needs of cotton or milo, and corn you're probably looking at 5 to 6 to 8 even, depending on what your yield goal is. And then we try to offset our peak water demands by split planting. Still have a lot of guys growing full circles of corn, but that corn may be planted the 3rd week of April and the other half circle planted 2nd week of June. So there's some strategy involved there.
In a year like this one, a typical situation that I would run into under limited water situations is those farms where I only have spray pivots. It's not profitable to put out a whole lot of spray or water in the spray mode pre-plant. So I'll typically put out usually about 2 inches of water in the spray mode before we plant, and then hope to catch up early in the season on those spray pivots. I've tried the opposite, and you almost have to put out double the amount of water with a spray pivot to get the exact amount that you need in the soil. And so that obviously is not a profitable venture. About 2 inches is what I put out now on a pre-plant on a spray pivot. On a year like this one with a LIPA pivot or with drip, I'll typically put out 3 to 4 inches pre-plant, kind of depending on the situation. Again, trying to get that top 3 feet reasonably full. Not to beat a dead horse, but I really try to talk my customers into no-till. There's a huge difference between stored water on no-till and conventional till, and you can follow it usually all summer long. We do apportion our water a little bit in some cases, depends on the farmer, but we do utilize that early corn early situation where we're planting a real quick corn at the 1st of April at certain populations, depending on our water supply. Concentrate the water on the corn early, try to get in and out of the corn. The corn will usually suffer a little bit on the tail end, we know that. We're not in that game to try and grow a big corn yield. We're in it for other reasons, where we shift the water over to the cotton, you know, in July and August when the cotton's at peak demand. And our bread and butter is the cotton, not the corn. And so we shift all of our water over to the cotton acres, and we can usually make the same amount of cotton on that whole farm that we would have if we planted the whole farm, and so the corn is a bonus. That may change somewhat if we get into water regulations of 18 inches. That will probably change, and we'll probably have to rethink that issue, but right now that's working pretty good for us. Gets us into no-till easy into parts of the farm that we're not currently into no-till, and it keeps the sand from blowing on places that typically blow.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as early season crop planting, we've tried to get most of that done. Put them up because it's just making the dirt blow and our residues going away. But we're planning crop mixes, you know, which circles we're going to split, which circles are going to be able to be a full circle of corn or cotton, and we're deciding plant populations. We're adjusting up or down based on the water, like where we ended up last year, or if we know we're getting a well drilled or we're working over a pump, we may up our populations back up. And we're moving our planting dates around. The last 3 years, planting corn a little later has worked out better for us as far as moisture use and temperature. That later planted corn has missed some of the June winds and high temperatures. So we're trying to spread out our planting dates as well is get some started early, some late, just spreading our risk out. And we're starting to look at information like the websites that Daryl mentioned, the aquaplanner.net with Pat Scarth. And I have one client that's using HydroBio, which uses infrared sensing with their computer software to give you crop water use on a daily basis. And if time allows, I have that website hooked up, and I just thought I'd show you some pictures if anybody's interested. Anymore, we kind of don't even look at starting corn until about the 20th of April, all the way up to 20th of May. And work in cotton there 1st of May. If it's warm enough, just get it in and get it done. And then go back to corn.
So how late will you plant corn?
First, second week of June if it has to. But, we used to push early corn was always the deal. Early corn always yields better. Well, it hasn't been that way. May 20th to June 1st has been as good as anything else.
The comments from the panel on that last question has led me to ask another question to add to it, if you guys don't mind. Are there folks that are pre-watering too early? Is there too much of that going on?
No. 0 degrees, nobody's pre-watering. Now, maybe there are some clients that have tried to start, but my guys, there's start, stop. In general, I think yes. Yeah. These same 2 customers that have eliminated wheat out of their rotation have also almost completely eliminated pre-water. AgriLife Extension shows in their research it's the most inefficient water we can put on. I mean, we need something there, but when you start too early, it just goes away. It just vanishes. So they're moving it closer and closer to planting, or after planting, we're really making a push where we don't have to share that water with wheat. We can put all that water in that row crop, build that profile while the corn is small.
The next set of questions, and again, feel free to chime in with any questions you may have, but will be for the growers.
Well, I guess I have to start with moisture blocks. It's important. It's been important in my operation. I've seen it save me a time or two. Last year, we had a rain come in July. I had one farmer receive 10 inches of rain. Well, I was just hooting and hollering. I wasn't going to water for 2 weeks. The moisture blocks on that thing, it just started down. The 3rd foot started down, and right behind the 2nd foot, I called James, and he said, well, I'll run out and see if a rat had got into the wires. He called me and said, no rat. I turned the pivot on, they just kept going down, and I never did gain back on that. Everything just went to 0, but still made good cotton. But moisture blocks have made me money. I have pivot track on all of my pivots. I can monitor my pivots at all times, pressure, turn them off, turn them on. On my outside perimeter of my farming, I want where I can control them, just where I'm at, because I do all the spraying. So I have to be, if I have one break down, I don't want it to run. But the most important thing about the pivot track is end of the year I can take off all the information of it, which is my water, the amount of water I put on, my rainfall, and I can figure out what that inch of water I applied, what it made me. That helps me on my rotation. I see what rotation is making me the most money. Meters, I live by the meters because that's my nozzle package. I have several farms that I gather a lot of water off from the state highway, dirt road, so I asked the state to help me with my waterways. Let me get that water. I run tailwater pits, they have filters on them, and I had rain last year that I ran pits 2 weeks.
One thing I want to add before I give it to Glenn is that pivot track is really handy for us consultants, because you can call the grower in the morning after raining and tell you exactly how much it rained everywhere, so you know where the muddy farms are and can get around.
I think water management, probably in my operation, is probably one of the most important, especially since 2011 and even prior to that. Being involved with the TAWC, it's kind of helped to teach me to look at water management in a total different way. And I think 2011 was probably an eye-opener for me, is because it kind of all seemed to kind of come together in one single year of how important it really was. On my operation, we use a lot of strip till. We kind of do some minimum tillage as much as, or as least as possible. When it comes to water management, and I guess one of the main things we use the ET program that the TAWC has come up with. We kind of combined all that together. As far as soil monitoring, I still use the soil probe to feel the soil and how wet it is. My entomologist, he kind of gives us a weekly report, and it's just kind of a reconfirmation to how good a job I'm being able to monitor that moisture. I think ET is probably the most important, and it's probably the simplest in the long run. You kind of get a real good feel of crop development from the very beginning to the very end of the season. I don't have any problem with the AquaSpy probes or EcoDrip or any of those probes. They just give you a better, they're just another tool that you can look at to give you a better feel of really what's going on.
I invited a grower to be here on the panel, but he wasn't able to make it, but he did answer all the questions that he's going to be asking today. And his answer to that first question, what is your water management strategy, is just simply to get the best economic return from the available water and resources available. It means he matches crops and yield goals for each circle to what he believes is realistically available. And he does not limit himself to one crop, but will split circles between 2 crops, sometimes 3. Splitting circles allows him to water each crop when it's most critical. Corn in June and early July, and cotton later in August. In addition, he uses pivot track on every sprinkler, and has for some time. But he uses it more so now to monitor his pressures on his sprinklers. He didn't used to be a big deal on pressure. It was just whether it was on or off. But now he gets he makes a point of saying that he looks at those pivot track reports on his phone twice a day and looks at those pivot pressures twice a day. And if he knows immediately if something's going on.
On all my pivots, we use net irrigate on that. That's what the TWC kind of used. But one of the observations that we had with all the producers that's involved in TWC is we had one site, everything was monitored that's in the program. And probably the next thing we noticed is the majority of all the producers started putting those systems on all the rest of their pivots. So, I mean, that's a tool too as well. I kind of agree with that. I think our strategies has changed a whole lot. I guess for one, we've kind of come up with a number of 4 gallons per acre per minute, and that's the kind of number of acres that we'll plant under a pivot where we can irrigate it at that rate. I guess we've used Dr. Jim Podarsky's and Dr. Dan Krieg, some of his recommendations, and not use a whole lot of pre-irrigation and save that irrigation for later in the season. One of the things we've done with some of the sites on the TWC is we've had one span that we turned into Lisa, and the rest of them are on Lipa. We show about 160 pounds difference in yield in cotton on exactly the same amount of water. And it shows about $100 an acre difference in profit just from Lisa or spray to Lipa. So it's really important when we look at water efficiency on how we get that water in the soil. And I think that's probably one of the things I've learned in 2011. We do have to get that water in the soil. Just spraying it on top of the ground is not going to cut it. Because, I mean, those probes show that, hand doing it, penetrometers, however you do it. We've got to get that water in that soil, and we've got to save it. Whether we use a crop residue or previous crop residue or whatever we do, but that's where it's the most important, I feel like.
2011 was a wild experience. I just, on my own personal land, I just stopped watering corners, period. I went dry land. I'm trying to do a wheat cotton rotation. I can just see if we can ever raise some wheat, get some moisture, we can raise some good cotton back behind that. I tried to quit plowing my yellows in. I just buy the more expensive, the Prowl H2O. I spray it with my sprayer, then I turn the sprinkler on and water it in. And I've gone to more of a wheat rotation. If like a half section, 2 circles on it, I'll take 1/2 of one of those circles and plant wheat on it. And I know we haven't had good wheat the last couple of years, but I'm finding it to pay me dividends because instead of getting that 4.0 to 4.5 gallons per acre, it's raising mine up to 5 to 6. And then I'm spreading that across my corn and cotton. So I just feel like less stress I can put on the crops, less stress on me. Try to keep my gallons at that 5 to 6.0 per acre.
He spends more time going through each sprinkler, changing regulators and nozzles to make sure everything's correct. 10 or 15-year-old pivots, those regulators are not regulating much anymore, and the nozzles are not putting out what he thought they were. And in 2011, that showed up in yield maps and aerial pictures and everything, just where everything was all messed up. So everything is, he's put a lot of money into that. And a lot of spacings have changed. They've gone from 10-foot spacings to a lot of 30-foot hoses now. And the next step to that is going to be LIPA versus LISA.
What type of information do you need to make the best water management decisions?
All right, number one is he has to have accurate budgets for each crop and under various yield scenarios to enable him to determine what proper crops to plant on each circle to achieve his maximum economic return. He has to know how much water he can deliver to each field per day over the course of the growing season. He has to know how much water is in the soil throughout the growing seasons. And toward the end of the season, he needs to determine the times when he can safely shut sprinklers off. Since we're limited to 18 inches of water a year in the water district.
Probably what different things on the water management is probably looking at which crop is going to generate the most revenue. I grow a lot of seed crops, seed sorghum and millets and wheat. And wheat's probably gets the least amount of water of all that. Because we look at that, what's the highest value return on my water? And even though it's getting very limited, we still have to look at that. We have to look at how much water is available in the summertime, like it's already been said. And that's kind of our water management strategies and what we really look at.
Well, for me, at the end, it's just, I take all the information I've gathered through the year off my pivot track. I map all of my fields as I harvest. I just take all that information. James gives me emails me the moisture blocks, lets me know kind of where I stand, where I need to start applying water, and I guess then it's time to plant.
If you were speaking to an uninformed public, what would you say in terms of explaining the difference between water conservation and water management, or is there a difference?
Water management is water conservation. I think the key is if we can, at the end of the day, if we can maximize the amount of crop with the amount of water that we put on, and use a lot of management techniques, whether it's probes or ET program or whatever, and we can keep from putting an additional amount of water that we wasted. We've conserved water, or we've used our water the most efficient. And I think that's probably the very most important part. And the other side is we got to use the best management practices that's available.
Are there any questions from the group for our panel?
On your gypsum blocks, I guess, was it James that was using those? What trigger do you use to pull for cotton, and then what do you use for corn?
Well, used to, Greg, we had some triggers in there. Anymore, it's just hammer down as hard as you could go. And it's become more a tool of realizing at the point of where we're not making a difference anymore, or we're really in trouble. And like Rocky was talking about, where we got that 10 inches of rain, and within 5 days we started seeing that third foot start dropping, that second foot start dropping. And in the matter of about 2 to 3 weeks, I was like, we were in trouble, because the pivot was running across those and they weren't moving. And then luckily we did get another rain. But, in many situations we can't catch up again. There are situations where maybe we have a half circle of corn, half circle of cotton, and we're at that 5-6 gallons per minute, where when we start seeing that third foot drop, where we can move some water and say, hey, we need to stay on this corn and make another pass through the corn before we go to the cotton, we can do some balancing acts there. But really anymore, a lot of this, we're dealing with a half circle of wheat or half circle of layout, and we only have 60 acres of irrigated crop during the summertime. It's just letting us know where we're at, and maybe make some management decisions with picks and fertilizer and things like that. It becomes more of a management tool than necessarily we need to put more water on this because we're doing all we can do.
When y'all are down to 250 gallons of water on a pivot, can you, what's your perspective on skip rolling those pivots? You're dragging, you're not, you're wetting less ground or versus leaving blocks of ground out and farming solid?
Had my first ones this summer. It sounds like that those guys are going to do more of them this year. It's more in that kind of 180 to 200 gallon range. But yes, that we're starting to see some of that, and I'm talking about we're still leaving out a half a circle, and then a half a circle we're planting skip row on. So, if you look at your actual planted acres, you're planting 30 acres, but that seems to be a good fit, where we're not getting any rain. If we ever start getting rain, my opinion always is you're better off to have it planted solid, because you can catch some rain and you can still make some crop. But where we're at right now, that's a viable option in my opinion.
I would say it's a viable option also. I think in those situations in dry years, it's the way to go.
Daryl, what do you do if you're no-tilling your drip? How do you take care of those Roundup-resistant careless weeds?
Well, that's a good question. We first start out clean. We'll do a winter program where we're spraying various herbicides in the wintertime so that we start out clean right at planting time. And of course, you got to be careful in those situations. We'll put down a yellow, usually Prowl H2O, before we plant, usually with that pre-plant burn down. We'll put a pre-merge, a Caparol, Carmex type product behind the planter. We'll mix in a dual warrant type product with our Roundup staple. So we've always got some residual in the mix. And then, hope we don't have too many resistant careless weeds. And, if you got to plow, you got to plow. You do what you got to do to maintain the crop. But, on the extremely bad farms that we know is a bad resistance problem, we won't be no-till.
How do you try to incorporate that stuff on the drip? That's my biggest.
Well, it's always, what I learned last year is you close your eyes and you do it no matter what. I was trying to watch the forecast, and some of my guys were saying, well, it's not, there's no rain in the forecast, it's not going to rain, what's the use of putting down Prowl H2O if we can't get it watered in, or the warrant or dual in with your Roundup, it's not going to rain it in. And I had several guys side by side. Some of them didn't do it, and some of them did. And miraculously, at the end of the year, you could pick out to the row where they did it. And, I was amazed. And so, I think you just got to make up your mind that you've got to put that into your crop mix, and you just got to go do it when it's time.
You seen when you're looking for the moisture versus people, so you're trying to minimum till versus trying to do some kind of deep tillage or ripping, can you tell any difference in the water percolation versus just a total stagnant bed versus trying to do some deep ripping? You've seen one method being better than another as far as water efficiency, getting water in the ground from big rain events.
Well, me personally, I haven't had any big rain events in 3 years. So it's kind of hard to tell. Kind of hard to answer that, really.
Over 20 years, surely you've had some big rain events.
I would say that the no-till is better, because if you get any kind of plant debris on the ground and you get any kind of microbe population, any kind of earthworm population going, those tunnels created by the insects or earthworms, and just the fact that raindrop can be shattered by the debris on the ground has seemed to me that the deep moisture is better on that type of situation than where you've ripped.
I have a little experience on some of that. We run a lot of cattle as well on our wheat pasture, and sorghum stalks and that kind of stuff. And in some winters we used to get into a problem with compaction. But and that's one reason I've gone to a strip till plow. And normally I don't ever run a strip till plow very deep, just kind of long enough to break the 2 to 3 inches, maybe 4 at the most, just to kind of break the hard pan. And that seems to always work out the best. And, with terminated wheat, or, if there's anything left, most of the time we've had very good soil percolation. I haven't seen that being a problem at all. And especially this year, walking some of the fields, I think there's enough cracks there to catch a 10-inch rain the way it looks.